what's interesting is we don't pay attention to anything we don't have a feeling about. Our brains are mostly spending their time constantly filtering out all of the irrelevant stimuli coming at us. And only when something triggers a little bit of an emotional response do we pay closer attention.
Welcome to Innovating Education, the podcast where we explore fresh ideas, bold strategies, and transformative approaches to learning. I'm your host, Dr. Riley Williams, and today we're talking about impact storytelling, the kind that moves people, strengthens communities, and drives real change. My guest today is Mr. Adam Olenn, founder of Rustle and Spark, a company dedicated to helping schools and universities craft compelling narratives that truly connect. They specialize in using storytelling to engage key stakeholders, faculty, students, parents, alumni, donors, and board members in ways that inspire action and deepen relationships. In this episode, we'll explore why storytelling is such a powerful tool in education, how institutions can leverage it to build stronger connections, and the common mistakes to avoid. Whether you're an educator, an administrator, or someone passionate about the future of learning, this conversation is packed with valuable insights. So let's get started. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Riley. I'm really happy to be here.
I'd like to start talking about the big picture. Storytelling is a powerful tool, but not everybody fully understands its role in education. So let's set the foundation. What is impact storytelling and why does it hold such power for educational institutions?
So, impact storytelling is storytelling at its core, but with a focus on a persuasive outcome, getting a message to stick, land, move someone to do something. Rustle and Spark is a branding and marketing company, so persuasion is at the heart of everything that we do. And we always like to identify the bright line between persuasion and manipulation. Because for some folks, sales and marketing have a bad rap and they deserve it. People who have used these tools unethically in sales and marketing, that sort of classic car salesman, they practice manipulation, which is trying to get someone to do something that isn't to their benefit. Now, we presume that if you're trying to persuade someone to do something, you have an interest in that. Or why would you waste your time? And so it's fair for it to benefit you. It also needs to be in the best interest of the other party in a way that you're not deciding what their best interest is for them, right? You are listening to their needs, responding to that, and then responding persuasively. So ultimately, good persuasion is about finding people who have a need and then offering them a solution to that need. That could be, I want to learn how to do math or fractions. I want a well-rounded education. I want to support a place I care about. I want to bring other people into a community that matters to me because I think they'll benefit from it too. All of those are ways that you would use these tools to build a better world that you want to see, and how persuasion plays a role in that.
So how did you find your way into specializing in storytelling?
So I really draw it back to two things. My mom and dad, specifically. My mom was a nurse and then became a health educator, really focused on anti-smoking. And so when we were little kids, the backseat was always full of boxes like pamphlets and brochures and like the display with the healthy lung and the emphysema lung. And one day after she had picked me and my brother up from school, she was working late. And this is pre-cell phones. So I'd finished my homework, nothing to do, really bored, walking down the hall. I looked in one of her colleagues' offices, and in this cluttered office up on the wall was a black poster with just a hand holding a gun, a revolver, and the cylinder was open, but instead of bullets, the other hand was loading in cigarettes. Oh my gosh, magic. I got it. So much more powerfully than all these acres of pamphlets and words and words. So that kind of powerful, immediate emotional communication, that was a magic trick I always wanted to do. And the other one was my dad. At any family gathering, holiday party, what have you, there would be a circle of people around him guffawing. He's just a masterful storyteller. And he was also a trial lawyer. And that's how, he made his living. He was known for preparing obsessively. But then whenever he would win in trial and he'd come home with a good verdict, Dad, how did you do it? And he'd say, I just told a better story. And he said, if you want to connect with the jury, you must be able to tell a story that they can connect with, understand, feel, and then make an informed decision based on the facts, but contextualized in that emotional framework. So those two things together really are at the heart of what I do and what Russell and Spark is about. And I've been in agencies since the mid-90s, but a bunch of my career actually was in-house, working in internal agencies in higher ed and K-12, where I would lead creative teams to do this kind of work in service of an organization. And education is a fascinating market. Every educational institution has a challenge that is 5 to 6x harder than most corporations in terms of their communication and persuasive needs. So if you sell sneakers, for the most part, you need to convince people to buy your sneakers. But if you are an educational institution, you have to convince parents and students to join your community. And that's two different levels of communication and persuasion, right? Often, if you're talking about independent schools or colleges, especially independent schools, parents tend to decide if you're going to go to independent school, and the kid tends to decide where. At the college level, that am I going to go to college has become internalized for a lot of students, but there's a fair amount of parental pressure saying, college, please. But the student is still choosing where. That's just for new folks. For your alumni, choosing to stay engaged or to re-engage after a time away. Donors, will they give among all the very valid competing priorities for their philanthropy out there in the world? For board members, are you going to spend your time, talent, treasure here advancing this institution, going out and advocating for it in the world? For teachers, students, faculty, and staff, they all have slightly different perspectives on the institute. So that's a lot of different audiences that all need to be communicated with different levels of nuance and context. And so that's where storytelling is such a great vehicle, in that it focuses everyone on what's most important here, but allows them to extract meaning and use their own imagination to engage in a way. It does a lot of the contextualizing from within the self rather than imposing it from outside.
So we've talked about the big picture. Now I'd like to shift our focus to the people at the heart of every institution: faculty, students, and parents. These three groups experience the day-to-day realities of an institution firsthand, and their stories have the power to inspire, connect, and strengthen the entire school community. So let's start with faculty. How can schools help educators become more effective storytellers?
So I'm really glad you asked that, because it is the best teaching tool that there is in history. How far back do you want to go? Old Testament, right? The parts, even if you haven't read it, you still know many of the stories from the Old Testament. You could grab anyone off the street and say, how well do you know Leviticus? And they'll be, I don't know. I think I met him at a party once. Or you say, have you heard of Noah and the Ark? Everybody says, yeah, of course. I know that story. And if we're staying that far back and bring it just a little bit forward, and you want to go New Testament, what is a rabbi? A rabbi is a teacher. And the messages of Jesus that everyone knows are the things he conveyed in story. And you can find that pattern in other faith traditions. The caves at Lascaux in France, there's a story that I think is 40,000 years old in Australia among the Aboriginal people there. These are the most durable, lasting, and powerful lesson conveying things that we have. When you want to teach your kids to not talk to strangers who might appear to be nice but not have a kid's best interest at heart, do you say that? Of course not. You tell them about children going to the forest and the old woman with the house and come in, my children. That's what a lot of fairy tales are. These are ways of teaching that are effective. When trying to teach the lesson, just say it is not going to be effective. So getting teachers in a place where, all right, what's the idea that we need to get across? All right, if we're not doing don't talk to strangers, which is a very low level lesson, right? That's early. We got to do fractions. How does storytelling help you there? Well, what's interesting is we don't pay attention to anything we don't have a feeling about. our brains are mostly spending their time constantly filtering out all of the irrelevant stimuli coming at us. And only when something triggers a little bit of an emotional response do we pay closer attention. Something gives you a bad feeling, you take a look, right? You could be walking through the forest and the wind's blowing a little so you can hear leaves rustling all around you because of the wind. But a sudden rustling in the bushes beside you will attract your notice because it triggered a little bit of an alarm response that was emotional, and that pulls your attention. Or you could be walking down a crowded street in Paris and you're just having a day walking by yourself. Thousands of people are streaming past you, but that person is attractive. One person out of 1,000 attracts your notice because you have an emotional response. So as educators, one of the best things that we can do is say, how can I create an emotional context that sort of localizes the content that I want to talk about? Let's say it's something as simple as ratios. We're going to teach a math lesson on ratios. We've all heard some kids say, oh, math is boring. It is when there's no emotional context. But when you create one, it suddenly becomes really interesting. So instead of talking about ratios, we can talk about the fruit that your mom ate. It turns out it wasn't a fruit, it's poisonous. Mom's going to die unless we can give her this antidote. But the antidote is so powerful, if we give her too much, that could kill her. So we have to figure out the right amount of antidote for how much mom. So we're going to take her body mass and the amount of this antidote. And there's actually a mathematical tool that we can use to figure out the right amount, and mom's going to be fine. And we'll all live happily ever after. So this is a way of creating an emotional context, setting up sort of a story moment that will make a student hungry for ratios rather than, oh God, you're going to force me to learn this? They'll ask, how does it work? Tell me.
I love that. When I was thinking about fractions, I was like, pizza. So let's turn to students. Their experiences, their successes are some of the most powerful narratives at an institution. How do you capture and tell those stories in a meaningful way?
I am so glad you asked this question. It is one of my solutions to a very hard problem. So here's the hard problem. There was a time where I ran marketing communications for Moses Brown, which is a 250-year-old Quaker school in Providence, Rhode Island. And so I wanted to tell the stories, just like you asked. What are all these great things that kids are doing? Well, who's the natural group of people to ask? They're teachers. What's going on in your class that's great? Tell me about these great moments in your class. Who doesn't love to talk about themselves? Teachers, right? They picked a job where their focus will be on someone else's success, not their own. Asking for great teacher moments and even great student moments in their class, that feels a little too self-focused for most faculty in my experience. But that same personality trait of being enthusiastic about supporting other people and celebrating others' successes, that can be used productively. And so I have found it's been very helpful to go to educators and ask them to rat on each other about doing great things. Tell me when you see a colleague doing something awesome, or having a moment with a student that's really awesome, or two students together. The more that you can pull the focus away from the person who's bringing you the story being in it, the more comfortable I find faculty tend to be. And there's always exceptions. But in general, asking teachers to tell me about other people's success is really helpful, and especially a colleague. They love to be able to support each other, which also promotes a really healthy, supportive culture.
So, what would you say are some of the most compelling types of student stories that institutions should be telling, and why?
Sure. The answer to what would create the most compelling student stories is the exact same answer I'd give to what creates the most compelling career growth stories, what creates the most compelling institutional stories. The answer is always the same because of a funny quirk about what we care about in stories and where the pathos comes from. Ultimately, do we want the hero to succeed in a story? Yeah, sure. We're rooting for them. But it is not their success or failure that makes a story stay with us or makes us really care in a deep way. Look at the works of Shakespeare. The comedies are great, but the most enduring ones are the tragedies. and the hero doesn't win in a tragedy. So if tragedies are so compelling, why? What is it that we care about if it's not victory at the end? And yes, we all love a feel-good story. That's fun. But those other stories stay with us. It turns out the thing that we really care about is that there is struggle. And the more the protagonist struggles, the better the story is. The deeper, the richer, the more powerful the emotional payoff at the end. So this is a mistake that he said, what mistakes to avoid? Here's the number one mistake to avoid in any form of corporate storytelling. Corporate meaning institutional, whether you're running a sneaker company or a college, an independent school, doesn't matter. The mistake that most institutions make is they want to tell a story like this. Life was all right. And then we came along and it got better. It was pretty good before, right? You're not that important. Whereas, and that's because we don't have any sort of absolute scale for emotion. You can't be 7 degrees happy, 4 degrees depressed. It's not a thing. All we can do is measure how we feel to how we felt a moment ago and compare them. That's why in a sports movie, it always starts out so improbable. The Sandlot kids, the Bad News Bears, Jamaicans bobsledding. What are you kidding me? And somehow, through a mixture of good humor, hard work, grit, luck, persistence, perseverance, they eventually get to the state finals, national championships, Olympics, whatever. And then they win. No. They get there, and before they win, the gear gets stolen, the coach gets disqualified, the best player or something goes terribly wrong, and it all falls apart. That's because if they got all the way there, they got to the Olympics and then they won. Yay. They went up like an extra half an inch in that emotional distance isn't very far. But if we drop them down low and then they overcome that and win, that much bigger delta creates a bigger emotional feeling. So when you asked specifically about student stories, show me a kid who was struggling, who didn't like it, who didn't get it, who didn't believe in themselves, and slowly came to think that, yeah, maybe they are doing all right. And they actually starting to, I'm passing now. Hey, I got a B on this. I might be able to get an A on this. And then they get that F that totally undercuts or they come to a concept that suddenly all the confidence that they've built just evaporates. How do you pull that together and get them back up to that place of confidence? That's the story where we're trying to pretend that they got something in their eye as they're writing the check to the annual fund or what have you.
I understand that. So I wrote a book. I hate to self-promote on this
no, please.
podcast.
Oh, yeah. See, there's that teacher thing.
So
Tell me about your book.
There's this little boy named Adam. He is in a wheelchair, and they are getting ready to play a basketball game. Adam's very nervous. So the coach, what I love about this book is the coach doesn't coddle, doesn't baby. He tells him to look at the banner, and it's the Knights. That's their mascot. And underneath the banner, it says loyal, responsible, brave, things like that. And so basically what has been trained within that school system is he looks at it, he says, I am a knight. I am loyal, brave, and true. And that really resonates with him. That builds him up so that they can have a good game. It doesn't say whether they win or lose. The point is that within the story, he is able to self-determine that everything's going to be okay.
Oh, that's great. I love that. So you just made me think of two things. One, a great movie that I saw 15 years ago, a documentary called Murder Ball about a wheelchair basketball league. And the movie is called Murder Ball because that's the nickname for the sport, because these people play full out. Talk about not coddling. It is a basketball game that you really got to think twice before you get involved. Are you up for this? But the other was, you reminded me of Rocky, which is a special movie. And do you know what's so special about it as a sports movie?
What's that?
That whole pattern that I just told you about like every sports movie you've ever seen? This is the one exception. Rocky doesn't win. He doesn't win the fight. He wins something better. Do you remember what he wins?
I've never seen it.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry for that spoiler alert.
It's homework.
It's homework. Given that I already spoiled that, you could edit this out. But what does he win? He wins Adrian. And she's a much bigger prize than any fight. All right. Well, watch Rocky. It's amazing anyway. Great movie. Written by this random Philly jumbo named Sylvester Stallone that no one had ever heard of. He wrote this thing, insisted that he be in it and direct it, and then went on and won an Oscar. And all of a sudden he went from like random nobody in Philly to instant movie star.
So, what role does storytelling play in shaping student identity, school pride, and engagement within the institution? Again, I'm thinking my own book.
Yeah, no, that's really great. Around identity, story is one of the most powerful forces there is to shape a collective identity. So if you're telling a lot of different stories, and you should, right, one story is never enough. Right? It's always a mosaic of stories that creates a culture. The way they unify a culture is when they all hinge around a central idea. And in music terms, that's a theme and variations. One of the best examples I can think of is the first movement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. How does it start? Da-na-na-na. And then what happens?
Da-na-na-na.
Exactly. And then da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na, da-na-na-na-na, and on it goes. And as you look at different layers of the score or listen, what you'll find is instruments at every level are playing some variation of da-na-na. Sometimes it's backwards, sometimes it's upside down, sometimes it's chopped and repeated. But that same idea is coming at you all these different ways. When a bunch of different stories, everyone's having their own lived experience. But all those stories center around the central idea of the school, its brand essence. Then they unify and they create a sense of culture. So in the example of the story you just shared, they're all stories about what is it to be loyal, brave, and true.
Yes.
Those are the three. See, you told me in the story, easy to remember the details. If all these stories are about loyalty, bravery, and truth, courage, honesty, there are synonyms for those same ideas that if all of the stories that we're telling each other center around those things, and in many ways, loyal, brave, and true almost are different facets of the same gem. What is it to be loyal? It is to be true to someone. What does it take to be loyal? Well, you have to be willing to stand up for it when it costs you. And that takes a kind of courage. And if you have that courage, then you are true in what you say you believe, right? And as you turn these ideas around, they all really feel like different faces of the same one. So if all of the stories you're telling hinge around those ideas, now you're creating culture.
So, what are some innovative ways that institutions can collect and showcase the student stories?
One of my favorites, if you're focusing on student stories, and this really works for kids of any age, college, university, post-grad, nursery, kindergarten, really doesn't matter. What did you learn today? Or what's something that happened today that made you curious? And why? And that steps people into a place of wonder. And wonder is very powerful. It's got an immediate emotional hook. We cannot resist other people's curiosity. That noticing when someone else is curious and then sharing in it is part of what gave us an evolutionary advantage. If I see you taking an interest in some fruit growing on a tree, and what is that? Is that tasty? And I try a bite. Okay, great. Now I just found a new food source. So learning about someone's curiosity is a great way to develop curiosity on your own, even if you weren't interested in the subject beforehand.
Now, transitioning just a little bit, parents are also a key audience, yet schools often struggle to communicate their impact effectively to them. How can storytelling build stronger relationships with parents?
So one, I want to come back to the stories about the brand, those reinforce to the parent why you chose this school and not another. Because this value is always at the center of what we do. That cannot be reinforced too much. The second is to go back to your question about what makes the most compelling student stories. And it really is the struggle. Because kids are going to struggle. And when you hear a story from a teacher or an administrator or whoever about a kid struggling and an adult helping them, sometimes by showing them what to do, sometimes by not intervening at all and saying, no, they're going to get it. I can see they're there, and my job is to not get in the way, so that they develop within themselves the confidence that I can do this on my own, whatever that is. But that moment of struggle and the adult perspective, and I'm saying perspective because it may not be an intervention. It may be the absent. Doing nothing sometimes is the best thing to do, but sharing that story of the kid struggling and getting to the place they need to be, and whenever possible, with a courage, loyalty, truth filter on the thing, that will reinforce for parents what's being done well. And it's so much more impactful than just an expository roundup. This week we did this, and then we did this, and then we did this. Those tend to be pretty forgettable. Which is too bad, because teachers put a lot of thought and work into doing them. It takes a lot of commitment. At the end of a work week of teaching, which is no small investment of energy, and you're just ready to go home. Nope, I'm going to write the roundup. Here's what we did. Here's some stuff. I'll try and drop in an anecdote. Now I go. To actually sort of reverse that, put the focus on the story. One, when you're telling a story that's interesting, it doesn't feel so much like work. And then you can have a couple of bullet points of, here are the content areas we covered. Also, there's a math test Tuesday. Don't forget the field trip. Send.
So what are some proven methods that institutions can use to build trust and transparency with parents through storytelling?
What a great question. So the key interaction of trust is anytime I put your needs above my own, that earns a penny of trust. Oh, this is a big deal. It might earn more pennies than just one. But anytime I put my needs above yours, I lose 10 pennies of trust. Or if it's a big deal, I could lose a lot more than 10 pennies. But there is a 10-to-1 earning to loss dynamic on trust of, am I putting you first or am I putting myself first? So one thing is to communicate to your audience in a way that respects their time and attention. If you're going to send everyone an email, don't spend a lot of time observing what season it is. It's fall and it's this and it's that. People know, right? They got windows. So make sure that you're getting right to something of value that they didn't have except for this communication. That is one small way of showing trust, or of earning trust. So you earn trust by putting their needs first. That can be done by very disciplined communication. But the other great thing about this is if you try and tell someone what to think or believe, forget it. We have perfect defenses against being told what to think. But we are almost defenseless against our own conclusions. When the evidence is in front of us and we put it together and come to a conclusion, that's almost unshakable. So what storytelling does, that's magic, is it puts the evidence in front of someone. It walks them through a series of events. Let's say we value diversity. A lot of companies have said that. A lot of schools have said that. Winds change. Some companies double down and some immediately back away from their quote unquote commitment. And now the evidence, they tried to tell us to think one thing, their behavior showed us something else. In a school setting, if you're saying loyalty, truth, and courage are our core values, telling those stories like we talked about earlier, where I show someone choosing to be loyal, to tell the truth, to be brave, when it would be easier, safer to retreat, when they could avoid a lot of static by telling a small lie, maybe, where it would be, they would earn some social capital by walking away from the weird kid who was their friend, but now that's going to be uncomfortable and it's going to cost them. But instead they stick by their friend. Now I believe loyalty is real there. Or when I see teachers doing the same kind of thing or standing up for the same, because we're all kids, adults are just older kids. So a lot of these same dynamics apply.
So this brings me to another point. How can we craft stories that resonate with both parents, students, teachers while maintaining authenticity?
Great question. And fortunately, we already have the pieces on the board that we need to get right there. There are two mistakes to avoid. One is thinking that the person in your story needs to be just like the person hearing it for them to be able to connect. That's not true. Now, representation does matter. Just broadly in the culture, you do want to see that there is a place for people like you that you can sort of look at and feel reflected by. But it's not everything. An example that I like to bring up is there's an author named Khalid Hosseini, and he wrote The Kite Runner, which is a big bestseller. And then he wrote another book that absolutely leveled me called 1,000 Splendid Suns. And it centers around this girl who grows up, becomes a woman, a wife, a mother in Afghanistan, living under the Taliban. I'm not a woman. I'm not Afghani. I've never lived under the Taliban or an oppressive regime like that. So like on the checklist, I got, why would I relate to her? But she's a human being who struggles, who cares, who is trying to live as authentically as she can in difficult circumstances, take care of people she loves, and also try and find space for herself in a world that's always pushing in to make her smaller. Who can't relate to those feelings to some degree? And so getting down to the struggle of those sort of core human feelings makes it totally relatable, even though in a demographic sense, we got nothing in common. So as you're telling stories, does it really matter that you're telling a story to a parent about a kindergartner or telling a story to a second grader about an adult at work? In some ways, that can be really helpful and reassuring. If you're the second grader and you hear about an adult speaking up in a work meeting where they're standing up for a friend who's on the outs, but they're not going to abandon them, there's a story of loyalty. There's just, as a second grader, I can totally relate to that. I've had that experience in the lunchroom just 2 days ago. And a good story that focuses on struggle, that focuses on what it feels like to be a person and trying to get through, it's magic in the way that it will transcend age, gender, class, all of those kinds of categories.
I will just say that The Kite Runner wrecked me. So I'm not 100% sure that I will take that book, but I will watch Rocky.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, 1,000 Splendid Suns. Devastating.
So let's talk a little bit about alumni. Alumni play a vital role in an institution's long-term success, yet engaging them effectively is often a challenge. What types of alumni stories tend to resonate the most and deepen their connection to the institution?
For alumni, it can be really productive to look at where they are, ask them about what makes you who you are. So when we started out and I was introducing with who am I? What do I do? How do I get there? I could have just said, oh, we do branding, we do marketing, we tell stories, and we do all this stuff. But I took a bit of my own medicine and thought, all right, well, what shaped this worldview within me? What made me where can I find the first spark of interest in these things? That, that sort of moment where like the kid is standing there looking over the fence at the horses on the racetrack and going, I gotta do that. Or the band on stage or whatever it is. For every one of us in the world, assuming you have some passion for what you do, there will come a point at which is the earliest you can remember. Going back to that, that's a really powerful place for alumni to find their origin story. Oftentimes it will be within the context of an institution. And sometimes it's great, like where I didn't care about math at all, ever. Never thought I would end up being a CFO. But In 7th grade, when we did the thing about mom and the antidote and ratios, all of a sudden it was like I could see math everywhere. And I got it. And it became it, right? I'm making this up on the fly, but everybody's going to have a moment where things changed. And change is the heart. If there's no change, there's no story. And so finding the moment where things tipped from A to B early on. And there's not just one tip. As you follow an alumni career and their growth into adulthood and into their professional self, you'll find multiple points like they can start to create a richer, deeper narrative.
So, could you discuss some effective storytelling channels that work well across different generations within the alumni?
The best, most effective channel, bar none, beats them all, is the original, face-to-face. And there's some really good research around this. Paul Zak has done a ton of research with analyzing people's blood around storytelling. And as soon as a story starts to happen, it's shown that you get a mixture of, you get dopamine, keep doing this, cortisol, focus and attention, I'm locked onto what you're saying, and oxytocin, empathy and bonding. So when a story starts happening, we connect. And it works digitally across screens and whatnot. But when you're in the same room and, seeing like the whole of a person's facial reactions and their body orientation, if you're an alum, a donor, a board member at the cocktail party, and you're, well, why do you support this? But we're doing this for these number of kids and whatever. And the person you're talking to is like kind of patiently, and they're +1, like their spouse came with them and didn't really want to be here. You can just tell it's like, how soon can we go? But if instead of that, who hasn't, right? We've all been there. And you're like, all right, whatever. But if that person instead is saying, here's why I love this place. I was a D student all the way up to the 8th grade until Jim Skillings broke me down to nothing to get through every defense and say, aren't you worth more than this? I think you are. I think you're worth something, even if you don't. So we're going to build you back up now and see what you could become. And now here's my success story. If you're the +1, you're riveted. You're leaning in. You're not saying, when can we go? You're like, oh, cool. What else you got? Tell me more. All right, now I lost the plot on your question. I'm sorry.
The channels that work well across different generations.
So channels, in person is the best. Video calls work pretty well too. One of the nice things is that digital media are great distribution tools. Human beings are so committed to story that every sense we have that has any acuity is a way for us to take in stories. Taste, smell, not so much. But our ears, obviously, right? That's the original. Our eyes, we invented reading and video to be able to convey stories. We get stories that way. And even touch for those who can read Braille. And stories can be very short. Instagram, Twitter, X, Facebook, those are all great delivery channels. Snapchat, TikTok. If you can put a video up there, you can tell a story. And a story does not have to be long to be powerful. Are you familiar with Hemingway's 6 words, the shortest story ever?
No.
All right, so I'll tell you via story. As the story goes, and this is true, there was a group called the Algonquin Round Table in the interwar years in New York that was Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Dorothy Parker, all the greatest writers of the age. And they would get together every Thursday for lunch at the Algonquin Hotel in New York. And by get together for lunch, they would get together and then drink all afternoon. And the way the story goes, it was Dorothy Parker's idea that whoever could write the shortest story with a complete emotional arc drinks for free. So they scratch away for a while and they share what they've got. Hemingway wins with a story 6 words long.
You have to tell me what they are. You're building up to it, I know.
For sale. Baby shoes. Never worn.
I just have to sit with that for a minute. Wow. As we're talking, something that I feel is important, all institutions should do, is homecoming banquets for the alumni.
Yes. Oh, here's a if anyone who listens to your podcast is in like either the communications team or in the advancement office or what have you, here's a free idea, take it and run with it, that we came up with for a client that was like a big social services organization. At their annual gala, obviously, we're a story forward kind of place. So we were pushing them in that direction to get more action out of their donor base. And so we urged them to create a set of coasters. And there were like 6 different variations that you can do. You probably need 5 or 6 as a minimum. You could do as many as you like. But where on the coasters were questions phrased such that the answer had to come up in a story format. When's the first time you remember loving learning? What's the first book you got lost in, and what was it about it? These kinds of questions, just as on the coasters, so as people are having their drinks, like, hey, what did you get? What did I get? I don't know. Or what's yours? And it was just a great way to get conversations rolling that were not, so how you been? Where do you live? What do you do? How's the kids? All of which is fine, right? Some basic social nicety check-in kind of stuff. But to get people quickly going in a place that was deeper and more mission aligned. In the example we talked about before, those stories on the coasters could have a focus that centers more around loyalty or truth or courage. And then that gets everyone buzzing and connecting on the idea of what makes this institution us instead of the one down the street.
So not who was your favorite teacher and why, because that can bring up positive and negative feelings into a debate.
So are you saying not to use that question?
Maybe not. What do you think?
Question. I guess who was your favorite teacher? I would struggle a bit to see someone coming up with a negative answer to that question, but maybe a negative response to that person's favorite teacher.
Exactly, the
Right?
negative response.
You love them? But you could also maybe sidestep it a little bit, because who's your favorite teacher? It's holistic about the person. That person's great. No, they're not. We're all complex. We're all great for some people, not great for others. But if you get it smaller, it gets more interesting, I think. Maybe what teacher helped you see the thing that you couldn't see right in front of you? What teacher helped you connect with a part of you that you didn't know was in there? What teacher believed in you more than you did and helped you see it? These are stories that are getting to like a moment of transition, as opposed to like, oh, this teacher was great.
I love that.
And it could even be like, actually, I hated that coach. He rode me all 4 years, always barking at me. However, I would not trade it for the world because he made me who I am today. That's a kind of like, was he your favorite? No, but I also appreciate him kind of the most. And maybe because of this one thing that he said, that as much as he was barking at me, it made me realize because he knew I had more and wasn't going to let me slack.
So let's talk board members and connecting with donors. Our board members, our donors, they both play critical roles in shaping an institution's future, whether through governance, strategic vision, or financial support. But too often they're engaged with reports, statistics, instead of these compelling narratives that we're talking about. How can storytelling make a real difference in these types of relationships?
So thank you for asking, because it's transformative. And it's actually where the impact story training that we do for boards, for schools, for corporations, where we go in and teach them how to do this, all the things that we're talking about. This started as a board engagement event where I was working with a school where half of the board was not enthusiastic about the idea of raising $15 million in new scholarship funding. Half the board was into it, half wasn't. The head of school, head of advance, everybody had worked them over, and And So I led a board meeting where we walked everyone through, we get everyone at their 10 top tables had a tear sheet for different priorities in the upcoming capital campaign they were working on. One table might have the new theater, somebody else might have the athletic facilities or the trips program or whatever. And what are we doing? Why are we doing it? What does it cost? And then on the back side, there were questions, like I said, phrased in ways that you had to respond to with some kind of story. And everyone had a journal at their place. And so put on some music, let them do a little bit of writing, share between themselves, big group share. Then we repeated the whole process. But in the second round, every table got the same tear sheet, and it was all about scholarships. And then when it came time for the big group share, at first it was a little bit quiet. I will admit I was nervous. And then the head of admissions put up his hand. And he said, 13 years ago, this little 5-year-old girl came on an admissions visit, and the head of lower school and I looked at each other and said, we got to have her. She is amazing. This is the most amazing kid. No question. Not only could her family not afford tuition, they were living in their car. They couldn't even get her here. So he worked it out with another school that she'd be able to ride that school bus because the route happened to go nearby. But at a time, it went nearby an hour before school started. So he and the lower school head agreed that they would take turns every day, coming in an hour early to meet her at the school bus, bring her to their office, have some snacks, coloring, whatever, start the school day. This was a K-12 school. And he said over the years, she's had every textbook she needs. She's never missed out on a field trip. She has had the full experience of any student here. And athletic leader, academic leader, honors, class president, just ultimate star. And he said, when she walks across that stage in May, it will be the best thing I've done with my career. And then they took a vote, and it passed unanimously. So for board engagement, boards will ask for talking points, but they never use them. Because as hard as you work to put together the talking points, at that cocktail party we talked about, the instant glaze over of the eyes as soon as someone starts reciting talking points at you, right? Nobody wants to be talked at with talking points. And board members didn't get to be where they are by turning off people when they speak. So they know very quickly not to use these if they ever try. But when you lead them through an impact storytelling exercise where they learn how to tell one powerful story, whether it's their own experience or something like the story I just told you about that girl. I was not the admissions director. I wasn't the kid, but I experienced that story and now can share it. And it's very powerful. Every board member goes out able to speak at the gala or the wherever they end up at the business meeting or whatever, telling the story that moves other people in a way that makes them understand why this place is inspiring and special and draws them closer to be involved. Of course, with donors, this reactivate, why did you give in the first place or graduate from here in the first place? This is going to reify all of those emotions and bring you closer to giving again and being part of that.
So scaling back out, what would you say are some common mistakes that we make whenever we are trying to engage with our stakeholders through storytelling?
The most common one is not actually telling a story. And a story's got to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you can't just make claims. People say, we want to tell the story. We have educated over 50,000. No. You've gone big and wide and generic instead of small and specific. A story is about a person, not people. It's not about the fourth grade. It's about this kid and what she's doing and going through. Has to be very specific. Another is, overthinking. This story's about a fifth grader. Will the fourth graders get it? Yes, of course they will, but don't get too hung up. And this is one that is actually a very common mistake. If you've ever done any therapy or work on yourself, one of the things that you're likely to hear is one of the ways you can manage a strong emotional reaction is name your feelings. This is good social emotional learning. Teach it to kids when they're 4 years old. Say what you're feeling, and the feelings get smaller and more manageable. And that is a great technique for life. But when you're telling a story, you want the feelings to be bigger. So it is an utter disaster for a story to name the feelings. You never say, oh, this is funny. Check this out. No. Or like when I told you the story about the board meeting where that admissions director was relaying the journey of supporting this girl as she went from the sort of impoverished kid who was a rock star to this glorious young woman walking out into the world to go make her mark. Right? There's a lot of pathos in there, but I never said, and it was so sad. As soon as I say that, like all the air goes out of the balloon. So avoid naming emotions. When you're telling a story, that might be the number one tip.
Could you say, I felt?
I wouldn't. As soon as you name the emotion, all right, this is going to get a little bit nerdy. I guess we're already a little bit nerdy. This is going to be, medium, deep.
Our listeners are nerdy too.
Oh, great. This is my tribe. These are my people. So your brain has a fixed volume of fluid in it, of blood that carries the oxygen and the glucose that makes the cells run, right? That's the fuel. When you're thinking a lot, using your prefrontal cortex, it draws more blood to it so that those cells can do the things they need to do to figure out the long division or whatever. And language is a very complex thing. It tends to be pretty prefrontal cortex heavy. Your emotional centers are, for the most part, towards the center of your brain, closer to the brain stem, wrapped around the cerebellum, and in that middle area clustered on the inside. So when you're doing a lot of feeling, it's hard to think. When you're doing a lot of thinking, it's hard to feel. This is why if you almost have a traffic accident, you have to swerve suddenly. It takes 2 blocks before you think of the snappy thing you should have said to that guy, because it takes that long for the blood flow to even back out in your prefrontal cortex to be able to put words together again. And so when you're in this story and you're creating this experiential moment, like getting a person to imagine the sounds, the feelings, the whatever, the little girl, the thing, the, oh my gosh, will I make it? Like they're in a very emotional place. As soon as you say, and I felt sad, connecting that, it takes them out of the feely part into the thinky part, which then the feely part just doesn't have as much to work with.
Adam, this has been just a fascinating conversation. Before we wrap up, I always like to ask this: what is one thing that you want listeners to take away from today's episode?
Every person has struggles in their life. Every struggle is a story, and every story matters. So your stories matter. The person next to you, their stories matter. And exchanging those is one of the best and most rewarding parts of being a person. And it makes you more effective at what you do. So just tell a lot of stories and listen to a lot.
And for those who want to dive deeper into your work, where can they find you and learn more?
Sure. The best thing to do is to go to russellandspark.com/story. And that's Russell like the sound, RUSTLEANDSPARK, russellandspark.com/story.
Thank you again for being here today. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to Innovating Education. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your fellow educators. Until next time, keep innovating.